I'm a master procrastinator. I do not amateur procrastinate. I procrastinate every single time. I procrastinate on all kinds of things. On, you know, doing taxes, on booking flights, on all kinds of stuff. But I do not procrastinate on music. Not anymore. I used to procrastinate on music a lot. I knew that it mattered so much to me, and I wanted to get it right. I wanted to really, do it justice. If I was going to put something out, I didn't want it to be whack. I didn't want it to be half-assed. I didn't want it to feel contrived. I didn't want it to feel trite. I didn't want it to be forgettable or boring. I wanted it to express some kind of deep truth about life, the universe, and everything all in one perfect song. And I made myself so busy without getting anywhere. And I learned a lot about myself in that battle with procrastination. And I've learned a lot about procrastination from teaching. Many of the people that I teach, that's their main problem. When you care a lot about doing something, sometimes even though you want to do that thing more than anything else, you just find yourself doing something else, right? So procrastination is putting off what is important even when you know that's not the right thing to do. Even when you know it's harmful to put off the important thing, you do it anyways. So why do we do this? What drives people to do this? Why do artists especially do this? How can we face this? How can we get through it, right? Well, there's several reasons to procrastinate, and most of them come down to your subconscious and your emotional state. Okay? So we like to think that we're these perfect, rational beings where everything that we do makes sense and we have reasons for all of our actions. But, when you actually study the brain with a lot of decision making, especially when you study people who are really good at things, like, for example, video games. If you study someone who's like really good at video games, they can basically kind of like offload. Because the conscious mind, right, it's slow. It was one of the last things to evolve. The frontal cortex, especially, that's where all of your like kind of social programming lives. All of the stuff that makes you a pack animal and not a violent criminal all lives in your frontal lobe mostly. And that's why, a lot of people who have frontal lobe injuries can become violent after suffering frontal lobe injury. But this is like an evolutionarily new area of the brain. The hindbrain and the brain stem and stuff, we share a lot of those same brain areas with lizards and, other seemingly primitive organisms, evolutionarily old school organisms. So that kind of base of the brain is often called the reptile brain or the lizard brain, and that's because it was very early to evolve. And if you study people who are really like, expert drivers, experts at video games, and you measure their decision making, you'll find that a lot of the decisions, they don't have time to go to the frontal cortex and mull around and be like, oh, what's my mom gonna think? What's how am I gonna look? How we blah 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 blah. All that social crap is important for making you not a criminal and being a compassionate person and stuff. But when you are trying to play a video game and you need to react quickly, you don't have time for all that. So the decisions are made in the brainstem. And when you measure the decision making, a lot of the people who get really good at things, get really fast at things, they've kind of, that you start by learning these things with like your frontal cortex, but with practice, they go down into the brainstem and you think less and less and less. But when you ask people about these decisions that are made so quickly that they do not populate to the conscious part of the brain, people will still describe their decision-making process as though they were aware of every single step. Okay? So when you measure the electrical chemical signals, the salt and potassium and stuff flying around the neurons, you measure the electrical activity that's generated by that. You can see in the MRI machine, you can see the decision happening, and then later going to the frontal cortex where it has become a conscious thing that you're aware of, right? And this means that Ash is trying to break in. This means that we have an illusion of conscious decisions when much of the time, especially with things that are habitual, much of the time that decision is happening in other areas of the brain that are not subject to conscious awareness, right? So, as much as it feels like we have total free will and control of all of our actions, a lot of that is actually us rationalizing our decision making after the fact. Okay? And this is, if you look this up, there's tons of research about this. This is totally real. We make decisions unconsciously, and then our conscious mind cannot penetrate the depths of the subconscious. So the conscious mind will rationalize our unconscious decisions and give us a narrative, because narrative is how we understand meaning, and it's how we understand the world. So when you look at the science behind this, you will realize that, yes, there is an experience of having free will, but much of your decision making is unconscious. Much of your decision making is automatic. And when you can recognize that the unconscious mind has a central role in your behavior, you can start to create strategies that can deal with it. But when you don't acknowledge that the unconscious mind is making seemingly conscious decisions for you, you're going to be at a loss for control of your behavior.